Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. At the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from the Wide Left Substack. He's Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, it's just about done for day one of the legal tampering experience. How is it for you? Do you feel tampered?
I feel extremely tampered. Honestly, it doesn't feel legal at all.
That's I'm uncomfortable with this line of questions that I was the cause of, and I immediately regret trying to find out anything more about you and tampering. Well, welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys are all doing well. This is an emergency pod. You just got one last week. You just got a pod last week. Now you get an emergency one because Kirk Cousins has decided to go to Atlanta. This is worth looking into because this changes basically the identity of the team. So we will be going over that. We'll be going over some additional signings that the Vikings have made, some interesting rumors that have been going on as far as potential Vikings free agents, and a mailbag as well. But before we start, again, thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. If you enjoy the show and would like to help support us financially, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go over to patreon.com/NorseCode, and for $3.50 a month, or a little less for the year subscription, you get access to stuff like the bonus episodes, which a new one will be coming out here in a couple days, and you get access to things like the Discord. So check it out, patreon.com/NorseCode. Special thank you to Kim Harley for donating, for joining the Discord. Thank you so much, Kim. Really do appreciate it. Again, patreon.com/NorseCode. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode as well for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com for any number of wonderful items with the Norse Code merch all over it. There's baby onesies, there's t-shirts, posters, flags. We really need to just acquire a flag for reasons. I feel like that's a good business expense.
For reasons.
Yeah.
We could fly it somewhere. Where would we put the flag, James?
I mean, the next live show, we could have it displayed so that people could see that this is a Norse Code thing, as opposed to
you don't think the 6'5" guy in a Norse Code hat and then the 7'12" brown guy with a beard is gonna signal?
It does give off a certain vibe. I will say that.
Okay. You know what? The flag seems like a good idea, though. Also, the next time we rent a car, let's say to go to JMU homecoming again, or hey, JMU's dancing, right?
JMU's JMU's going to the men's tournament, men's basketball tournament.
Where's that being held? Well, it's 4 places, but where's JMU's bracket?
You know what? I'd have to look. They haven't established. They haven't established it yet.
Right, because it's not Selection Sunday or whatever it is yet.
Correct.
I know about basketball. I'm educated about these matters.
Yes.
When we know, we could rent a car, and then in the car we'll put the flag.
There we go.
Right. So yeah, or when we're in Germany, obviously, for the game.
Still going for the Germany thing, huh? All right.
Yeah. Well, did I say that on the podcast, or was this just a Discord bit?
No,
okay.
this was it was both, actually. It was fantastic. So again, norsecode.threadless.com is where you can go for the Norse Code merchandise. All right, let's get into the show. And before we discuss Kirk leaving and all of that, I feel like it's time. We don't do this very often, and I feel like it's time for Arif to debate the only person who's on his level. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now time once again for Arif Debates Arif. I have a question here for Arif, and he will debate multiple sides of it. The question I have for you is, was the Cousins era a success?
All right. Well, like any good debate, it has to start off with good definitions. And I think that the best way to look at this is to take a look at what success means. Success does not mean turning up your numbers on some spreadsheet. It means winning games, right? There's no element of success where you want to watch your team lose in order to maximize return on investment. That's not what success is. That's not what sports are. That's not what football is. So success means winning games. It means maximizing good outcomes that allow you to win games. And this era was a success. There was no chance the Vikings were going to win the Super Bowl with the roster they had or the team history that they are, but they got closer than they should have because of Kirk Cousins, and the losses that he had weren't his fault. They still regularly made the playoffs even with bottom level defenses. Cousins put the team on his back. He ranked 8th in the second most useful statistic for predicting outcomes, which is completion percentage above expected plus EPA composite, and he ranked even better in the most predictive statistic in PFF grade. He was truly a quarterback that went incredibly underappreciated. People will talk about, hey man, he had all these great receivers: Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs, Justin Jefferson. These are all phenomenal receivers. Justin Jefferson is the best receiver in the league. But how often does the best receiver in the league get 1,600 plus yards? Not that often. Justin Jefferson got 1,800. I think a lot of that has to do with how good Kirk Cousins was at getting him the ball. And in terms of watchability, the Cousins era was insanely watchable. I think Vikings fans have been spoiled just in terms of how watchable football games are because they've had Cordero Patterson do crazy stuff against the Ravens. They've had Adrian Peterson do a bunch of stuff all the time. And now they're like, Kirk Cousins, he's a boring quarterback. No, he's a boring guy. He's an exciting quarterback. You take a look at what he did on 4th and 18 against the Buffalo Bills. You take a look at the greatest comeback in NFL history against the Indianapolis Colts. You take a look at the game, the fourth quarter comeback percentage that he had, the close games that they were in, the close games that they won, the fact that over the course of his tenure as a Vikings, Kirk Cousins ranks 5th in the NFL in fourth quarter comebacks. That's nuts. That's insane. He has more than Patrick Mahomes in the regular season. That is so exciting that I can't think of anything other than that being a success for fans, being able to watch wins, being able to watch exciting games, being able to get invested in every single game, especially over the last 2 years. There was always something to talk about with this guy, whether it was, close game winning percentage, whether it was sustainability. It's frankly, it's a lot better. It's a lot easier to talk about, hey man, this team is a fraud. They've won too many games than, hey, this team is secretly good. They haven't really lost that many games if you think about it. That conversation sucks. The fraud conversation, that absolutely rules. Plus, you always got to talk about other stuff like the usefulness of statistics, whether or not it matters that he doesn't care about death, vaccines, great conversations, I think, for everybody all the time. 100% a success.
All right, so let's take the other side of the coin there. Why was the Kirk Cousins experience not a success?
What that guy said, completely stupid. Doesn't make any sense. He had to contort a definition of success. He changed his definition of success partway through. I don't know if you noticed that, James. Clear debate trick there. To go from winning games, which he was like a 500-ish quarterback winning games, to having fun watching the guy. Nobody had fun watching the guy. Fun things happened around him. We'll talk about the definitions of success in a second. But before any of that, you just got to break down this definition of success. There's only one kind of success in the NFL. It's winning the Super Bowl. Did that happen? No. Was there time to do that? Absolutely. The idea that they weren't set up for success or that they would ever reach the Super Bowl, that was the whole point of bringing Cousins in. That 2017 team was incredibly stacked. So they got rid of Case Keenum. They brought in Kirk Cousins. And yeah, Cousins is supposed to be a better quarterback than Keenum. So why weren't they able to do anything with that? A lot of that has to do with Cousins. And hey, we might have liked all of those close games in 2023 and 2024, but they didn't happen until 2023 and 2024. The Vikings were not good at getting back from behind with Kirk Cousins at quarterback. The whole point of a quarterback, right? If the defense is putting you in a position to win and you don't win, that's on you. I'm sorry. They didn't win a Super Bowl. The era was not a success. They couldn't win close games. They couldn't win comebacks. The only time they ever figured out how to come back with Kirk Cousins at quarterback was when he got worse at the first, second, and third quarter. So he just made up for it in the fourth. That's not fun. That's excruciating. You know how bad Kirk Cousins was in 2-minute drills? Not only could he not have a single comeback in a Vikings uniform until like 2019 against Denver or something, like the one time he did it. Not only that, he couldn't win a 2-minute drill, period. He didn't win a 2-minute drill for the first 3 years in a Vikings uniform in a game or in practice. He didn't win a single 2-minute drill in practice. That's crazy. He wasn't any good at it, and he couldn't win close games until he made the games too close. Greatest comeback of all time against the Indianapolis Colts? They were coached by a substitute teacher. That's crazy that you would consider that. Yeah, they got down and they came back from 35 points, the most an NFL team has ever done. They shouldn't have been down 35 points. Some of that's on special teams. Some of that's on defense. Some of that's on Kirk Cousins, man. You cannot create a situation that you then become the hero of. All you're doing is putting your butt out of the fire. That's all he did in 2023 and 2024. That's crazy to think that era was a success. There's one way to measure success. He didn't meet it, but even by the other measures of success that this other guy was using, winning games, 500 quarterback for most of his career, ends up winning a couple of close games at the end, not winning games, didn't even win more than one playoff game. And then exciting? It's exciting? Great. That's fantastic. You know whose games are not exciting? The Chiefs. You know who you swap places with in an instant? Chiefs fans. That's nuts. Nuts. Absolutely not a success. No way could you consider the Kirk Cousins era a success for Vikings fans or the Vikings.
I'm just envisioning that report that came out the other day about the Chiefs fans that needed amputations. Like I'm envisioning switching sides.
They're mostly happy.
They're mostly happy. The parts that aren't were cut off. So yeah. And just as a stat correction, you were referring to the 2022, 2020, and 2023 seasons there, not 2022 or not 23 and 24. Let's go
Close
into let's go into the middle ground here. Why was it a success if you kind of, well, in the larger sense of the word sort of thing?
Like what is the larger sense of the word? Like, as a content creator, it was extremely successful for me personally. Always something to write about.
And we had plenty of interesting episodes where we were just having like heart attacks often after games, going, I don't know how the hell they did it, or talking about the worst Cousins interceptions we've ever seen in our lives. He was responsible for a couple of those.
Mark of a good quarterback, I think, is to employ podcasters.
judging the landscape of Vikings podcasts. Yeah, I could see that.
See, there you go. Kirk Cousins era. Clear success. Unambiguous success.
On most levels. So there'd been rumors for the last few weeks, and even last episode, the Reef had declared it's looking 50-50. Florio is apparently redeemed, or some version.
Yeah, that's
of
like
that
that's the one issue I have, honestly. Like, oh no, he's no longer in Vikings uniform. They're not going to win as many games. Oh no. No, it's Florio's right, and he gets to stunt on people for it. That sucks. Why would you do that, Cousins?
Yeah, that's it. It could have been anyone else, and it would have been fine. I'm just envisioning him playing for the Raiders in Las Vegas, because nothing screams Vegas like Kirk Cousins. As flashy a man as there ever was. So the details are still coming out. However, it's looking like a 4-year deal, which is about 2 years more than the Vikings were trying to offer him.
Yeah. It's a 4-year deal, $100 million of it guaranteed, which suggests that only about 2 years of it are guaranteed, 2 and a little bit more. I think someone had taken a look at the structure, if the structure's out yet, and had mentioned that it's essentially like $10 million guaranteed after the first 2 years, and that primarily comes in the form of like prorated signing bonuses, etc. So it's like a 2-year deal that maybe you could argue is functionally guaranteed for 3. I don't know, but hey, it's $45 million a year, $180 million total. That's a nice chunk of change to have out there. Not something he typically cares about, just in terms of advertising the deal is better than it is, because he's been fully guaranteed the whole time. But it sounds like, the Vikings, wanted a 2-year deal. I guess the 2-year deal is probably not fully guaranteed. And then he doesn't have to worry about, negotiating again if he proves that he can continue to perform. So there's some security there, which I wrote about in my piece about how he values security kind of above all else. So, yeah, I mean, you understand kind of why he takes the deal. Obviously, we don't know what the Vikings counter offer terms were, but if they were $45 million for 2 years, fully guaranteed, he could, either take the $90 million 2-year contract with $90 million guaranteed, or he could take a $100 million contract fully guaranteed with 2 years tacked on to the end of it. And it seems like potentially a more secure situation. Plus, it might just be also the commitment from the Falcons, because my understanding is that the Falcons were committed enough to Cousins that they were prepared to even bid against themselves. I don't know. So this morning, like, a Schefter video came out before like the actual start of the legal tampering period, where Schefter says something along the lines of, hey, if Atlanta wants this guy, if they really want Kirk Cousins, they're going to have to pry him out of the Vikings, from my understanding. Now, my guess is that Mike McCartney, Kirk Cousins' agent, told Adam Schefter, hey, man, the Vikings are pretty close to securing this thing. It is like, if Atlanta really wants to do something, they have to step their game up. And Schefter repeats that, and Atlanta upped their offer again. I would imagine. This is like, I'm doing fan fiction right now, speculating. But that's what I think kind of happened. And so, given that the Falcons were basically completely in on this guy, I think that level of commitment outside of structure and money may have also swayed things. It helps that his in-laws, that Julie Cousins' parents, are in Atlanta. And it turns out that Don Cousins heads up a church in or near Orlando, Florida, the Discover Church. So family is actually fairly close by, so that helps. But the commitment of the Falcons may have helped things a little bit along too. And like, that's what the guarantees represent, is that level of commitment. And the fact that the Falcons, even from the combine, were willing to go on a full court press for this guy, I think might have meant a lot to Cousins in a way that, the Falcons probably offered more, but it kind of pushed things over the edge in the Falcons' favor that they were willing to do that. So I think that played a pretty big role. I talk a little bit about the psychology of Kirk Cousins. My piece is not that long, but I just kind of reflected on the strangeness of the Kirk Cousins era. And part of it is like his desire for security, not for stability, not for wins, but for security, kind of above all else. And I think that the Falcons offered that. I think that that's what he's driven by, and that's what he does.
Well, I mean, just looking at it on face value, the Falcons are looking to get like at least 3 years out of this deal. And the Vikings were in a position where they were wanting to look younger, and the Falcons were like, we did younger, screw this.
We did younger, didn't work out, don't like ourselves anymore.
No, and just looking at the Falcons team, this is not a better team than Minnesota, especially on offense. So it's interesting to see, but that's based on last year's coaches, last year's coordinators, and all that. It's an interesting decision. It definitely tracks the security, and it definitely tracks the guaranteed money aspect of it. He wanted to be in a position where he wasn't going to be, taken off the field in a year.
Yeah. That I think is entirely it. I mean, the Falcons, it seems like, don't see him as a bridge quarterback. The Vikings obviously would. And I think it probably really, I don't know about insults, but it probably is a very distasteful idea that he would be a placeholder instead of the guy. Like, he has talked about, how guaranteed contracts give him a license to lead. That's a phrase that he uses. And that doesn't happen when there's like a first round pick waiting for you to make like one mistake, right? That was his concern at Michigan State. That was his concern in Washington. And that was why he was like, I cannot have an ambiguous quarterback situation, which is why, he really liked the Minnesota deal so much. And I think if Minnesota offers him $45 million, even if they're all fully guaranteed, there's no, like, you can't get around the fact that Minnesota has been looking at quarterbacks, and there's a very good chance that they would get a quarterback in a 2-year deal environment versus a 4-year deal environment, even if the final 2 years of that 4-year deal are not guaranteed, and it could functionally be very similar, right? Like, the fact that it's on paper in some capacity would suggest that he wouldn't be a bridge quarterback in that situation. And I think that was like kind of a big part of his motivation too.
So he is a Falcon. And unless the game gets moved to London, the Falcons are going to be playing at US Bank Stadium this year. So there is potentially going to be that.
So Matthew Stafford question: cheers or boos? Right when Cousins shows up,
that seems like a cheers situation. Like,
I would have thought that with Matthew Stafford with the Lions, but then they booed him, and I was like, hey, that's kind of surprising.
That was a playoff situation too, though. This is not.
So?
This is not a playoff situation. Playoffs are different than like a week 3. We don't know what our team is game yet. Like, that's seems a bit odd.
I still think it's like okay to be like, hey man, that was weird. Wasn't that weird? And then a bunch of Lions fans just get mad.
Well, also you have to compound the fact that they hadn't hosted a playoff game since World War II. So really you get where that's coming from at least.
You don't gotta cheer for him to win the game, man.
Just throwing that out there. But the Falcons will be in Minnesota for that game. That will be interesting. It gets moved to London. I can't imagine that gets moved to London. Like,
that would be so dumb. No way would they move that to London.
No, that would be the worst decision they could make. I can't wait for them to make that decision.
Right? Yeah, that's perfectly on brand.
Yeah,
that'll be the game they play in Germany.
Oh, just like to remind everyone that there's not currently a Vikings game scheduled for Germany. Arif just really has an itch to go to the fatherland. Apparently,
let's book the tickets, James.
The Patreon is doing okay. It's not doing that well. We'll do some more bonus episodes here. See where we're at.
Yeah, right. Let's bonus episode our way into a Germany trip. Which would also be I think a bonus episode.
So the whole thing, like we'd basically be just recording the entire the flight.
We would just turn it into an Anthony Bourdain homage, right?
Oh, absolutely. That would be that's the ideal situation anyway. It's time for our TikTok spinoff. We both knew this was coming. 10.5 years. This is what it was all building towards.
Finally, we'll break into the YouTube Shorts game.
Oh, good. No. You know how many
times I get messages from people that are like, "Hey, Reef, you should consider YouTube Shorts." I'm like, "Hey, man, that sounds like not a lot of work and still too much."
I'm trying to envision you in a situation where you can be, done saying something in a minute.
Well, we could speed me up. No one could tell the difference.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, maybe. So, what I was going over like memories of the Cousins era, and your piece was excellent for that, by the way. I'm trying to remember a more infuriating interception than one of the ones he threw. Because you think he threw 2 against the Steelers in that Thursday night game that was just made you want to punch something. I think the Vikings even ended up winning that game, but
I mean, it's tough because like the interception against Green Bay, I think it was, well, the first one was to Stephon Diggs, the second one was to Laquan Treadwell, right? I'm trying to remember that they were both in the same game, right? Was that 2019? I'm trying to remember.
That would have been the last year of Diggs, so.
Yeah, those were both insanely frustrating, but like there was a debate over whether or not it was like Stephon Diggs' fault, right? And so you're like, I don't know, man, if I'm going to blame Kirk for this one. And I think ultimately it came out that it probably was Stephon Diggs' fault, but that's like unsatisfying because everyone liked Diggs, no one liked Cousins. So they're like, yeah, it was probably Diggs' fault, but I mean, he should have known that Diggs would keep crossing or whatever, right? That one was incredibly frustrating. The one actually this year against Tampa Bay, which was 100% not his fault, which is why it was frustrating.
Yeah.
It was just like, oh my God, they could perfectly throw him past to not Kyle Rudolph, to TJ Hawkinson. See, this is how upset I am. I just called TJ Hawkinson Kyle Rudolph. The TJ Hawkinson tips it up and it's a pick in the end zone. You're like, good Lord, can't buy a break, The thing is, like, there's like a lot of frustrating moments. There's not like a ton of frustrating picks.
No.
Because he didn't throw that many, right? No. Which is like good, I guess.
My favorite moment of the Cousins era is probably the Kyle Rudolph push-off touchdown.
That
just because so of, I enjoy anytime the Saints lose. And that one is the only time, and I think you had even described it as the absence of sound. Like there was a sucking noise inside of the Superdome.
That was
the moment that
crazy
happened.
experience. Yeah, like when I was writing that post game, like inside the Superdome, which by the way, those seats are insanely steep, right? Like you're looking straight down at the field from the press box, which is like not the case in most stadiums. And so there's like it's just like a different atmosphere, right? And so you get this feeling that you're always on like the precipice, which is like an interesting way to experience a game. But like I'm writing this like post game reaction piece, and I can't get out of my head. Not that the stadium like went quiet. That's like a different experience. I've seen stadiums go quiet, right? But like you said, like the sound got sucked out of the room, out of the whole stadium. Like it just like it wasn't allowed to exist, and it had been extracted from it. That was the feeling. And I was like, I have to put that in the piece because that's my experience. And it just feels like that's the only way to describe what happened. That ruled. And then it was the 49ers game after that, which also was a piece that I'm really proud of, the post-game 49ers piece, where it's just like, all right, yeah, this is what we're talking about. These are two really good pieces, and I wasted it on Kirk Cousins. Some of my best pieces I think I've ever written, especially for The Athletic, were about Kirk Cousins, right? Kirk Cousins throwing his best route, the corner route, Kirk Cousins against the Saints, Kirk Cousins against the 49ers. It's all Kirk Cousins' fault against the Bears. I think it was like a week 4 loss against Chase Daniel, right?
Yes.
And that I thought was a pretty good piece. And then like I think it was like Kirk Cousins is not an elite quarterback, and that's okay piece, I think, which was the psychological, which I linked to in the piece I just wrote, the psychological profile, where I read the book that he wrote.
Yep.
And I watched
Drew McGarry went out of
his
his way to say that you had read the book that he wrote.
Yeah, he's like, this is deranged. Here's the thing about that piece. I don't think I've ever told the public this, but like the public. But I think I told you, James. My editor was like, hey, can you write a piece about what makes Kirk Cousins tick? And that was something he asked me to do the week we actually were in Baltimore, right? So for the JMU homecoming game,
right.
And then also, I guess, the Baltimore Ravens game that we were there to cover, right?
JMU being, that was the more fun game, let's be honest.
Yeah, that was the headline, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was more fun. And we were also like in the car talking about Aaron Rodgers. It was like one of our first Aaron Rodgers rants. But yeah, and my editor was like, hey, could you like what makes Kirk Cousins tick? And I was like, I'm not like a guy who like goes out and asks a bunch of players about a player and then I write that up and I just consider that to be the thing. Which nothing wrong with that. When I did that for my Daniil Hunter piece after he'd hit 50 sacks, great piece. I'm really happy with it. I'm really glad I asked a lot of people about it. So it's like good reporting, right? But that's just like not how I do it all that often. And I always feel like I'm missing something if I do it that way because, when I interview players, I don't do a very good job of getting them to get past that first level of, I don't know what I'm allowed to say with you without it being kind of, potentially blowing up in my face. So like, fine, I don't get them to get their guard down, which means I'm not going to get a good piece. So I don't know how to write this piece. So I didn't realize it. I'm like looking around like, hey man, is there anything in a book, with Kirk Cousins in it, maybe a Michigan State memoir or something? Because I think those will always reveal a little bit more. And then you can start building kind of a profile of this guy. And I realized that he wrote a book, which I did not know. Like he'd been on the team for years at this point, and I had no idea that he had written the book. I was like, what? Okay. And I go through the book and I read through the book like that night. And I like pull out stuff and I'm like, oh, this is good. This is good. This is good. Now that the vaccine thing just happened, let's here's this thing about there's an anecdote in the book, and I don't know things about biblical stories, so you'll just have to excuse me. But there's an anecdote in the book about, in the Bible, about how this biblical figure, this child, was, I guess, kidnapped by another nation, and they have a process to create like strong soldiers, and it starts in childhood, and they put everybody in the school, and you have to like eat their food and go through their training. And I guess their food was like not godly or something, or like God told them like, you got to continue eating your own food. You can see I'm like not very familiar with the Bible, right? And he maintains his the purity of his body. It's like really important to him. And so he doesn't eat their food. And at the end of this parable or the story or whatever, there's some sort of physical contest against like some of the other kids, the soldiers that they raised, and he wins. And it's like a victory for God. Right. And I'm like, hey man, we just went through this vaccine thing. That feels like crazy relevant. And so I put it in and then I take it out because it's like, it doesn't flow with the rest of the story, but it's like, I'm going to remember this. But yeah. And so I write it all up and I turn it in and it is 6,000 words. And my editor is like, hey man, what the heck? Like, it's like a midweek piece for Baltimore, right? Like you can't, what is this? And I'm like, you wanted to, what makes him tick? I watched every video he's ever been in and I read his book. And I like looked at the ESPN story about him being a CEO and about him going through all of this brain training to be like calm and collected all the time. This is what makes him tick. And he's like, I can't edit this in a day and turn it around. We're going to have to wait until the end of the season. And I was like, hey man, okay. But like, you need me, like the Athletic requires me to write 3 pieces a week. Like that's like, I get in trouble if that doesn't happen. And he's like, yeah, well, you should have turned in a 6,000 word story. And I was like, maybe, but look, you asked a question, I answered it. That's all I got. So that's what happened. And so that piece publishes like February 2nd or something. Like that's like right after the Viking season ends. I'm like, boom, got it. Here it is. So that was the story of that piece. And then I don't think I end up doing very much that week for the Athletic. Like, I think that I only had like one piece that week because I was kind of dejected from like not getting that story through. It's so inside baseball, I guess. And so I actually don't get very much done that week writing wise because I invested all in that piece. So if anyone ever noticed that from several years ago and for some reason remembers that, first of all, that's weird. But second, that's why.
Stop paying attention to the frequency at which I publish articles.
Yeah, please. Oh my gosh. Especially for the Substack. Good Lord. But I didn't publish for 3 days, and I was like, I haven't published for 2 weeks. What's going on? But yeah, that's so. Yeah, so I absorbed a lot of information about Cousins with the idea of kind of understanding how he works. Which, by the way, I did not talk to him for this story, so it's always going to be very incomplete. But I think that there's like some level of usefulness to that too. Like I think that there's still some information to be gleaned from a story that tries to break down a guy without ever talking to him. But yeah, so that kind of informed a lot of what I put into this piece. I've had 2 people comment like, by the way, the piece is titled, Cousins Once Removed, which
that's begrudgingly, what's the word I'm looking for? It's begrudgingly clever. Also a name
I don't hit a ton of home runs with titles. I'm bad at headlines. But boy, that felt real good coming off the bat. It felt great. But yeah, and 2 people mentioned like, hey, this is like pretty good. It ends kind of suddenly. And I just kind of felt like, is that it? And I was like, well, yeah, it's a piece about the Kirk Cousins experience. Like, yeah. What do you think, man?
There was no way this was going to end some other way. Like that's
there wasn't going to be a satisfying conclusion because there wasn't. Why would I write a piece like that? We want to live the Kirk Cousins experience, and this piece is kind of it moves around. It doesn't come to any solid conclusions. It kind of leaves you wanting more, and then it just ends. Like, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and all of a sudden you wake up in Atlanta, and you're having to go to a different Kohl's now. It's odd, but
you have to map out all the Kohl's in Atlanta. That's tough. It's a tough life.
So, in addition to the Cousins departure, there were a couple of players that have also left the Vikings, including Jordan Hicks and Marcus Davenport. It looks like, anyway.
Well, yeah. Well, so Marcus Davenport is gone. It probably means Danielle Hunter is gone. Don't know yet. But Jordan Hicks to Cleveland. So we've got that. Marcus Davenport to Detroit. Which that's going to be interesting because now, like, obviously he's going to be healthy for like 10 games this year, right? Like at least. And at least one of them, probably both of them are going to be against the Vikings, and he's going to have a great year, and it's going to be very frustrating. So yeah, that definitely happened. Jordan Hicks is kind of an interesting one, right? So the Vikings have signed a couple of players. We'll talk about that in a second. But they're getting younger, right? And Jordan Hicks was a free agent brought in who was already a veteran. So they obviously they brought in like, Zadarius Smith and Harrison Phillips and Jordan Hicks. They brought in a couple of veterans in addition to younger veterans like Byron Murphy. They brought in a couple of older veterans. But like, the plan wasn't that Zadarius Smith was going to be in Minnesota forever. It wasn't going to be that Jordan Hicks was in Minnesota forever. And so part of the process of getting younger is like finding players like the ones they just signed and replacing Jordan Hicks. And the first year he was with the team, whatever. Last year, though, he was like very good, and he fought through like a big injury, and he played with incredible, reaction speed and diagnosis and playmaking ability that you didn't really see from him in Arizona. You saw a fair amount of that when he was a Philadelphia Eagle way back. But he played pretty well. I don't know that he can keep that up or anything like that in Cleveland. Like someone like a Cleveland Browns reporter texted me like, "Hey, is Jordan Hicks any good?" And I was like, "Well, he was really good last year, but I don't trust it, right?" But props to him. I mean, he played very well for the Vikings. I don't know that that's going to continue. If it does, that's fantastic. If it doesn't, he's had a pretty good career, all things considered. But yeah, I mean, it was pretty clearly time for the Vikings to move on. So he finds a deal somewhere else. Cleveland has a stunningly good defense, or at least they did last year. Who knows, from year to year how that changes. But with Jim Schwartz as defense coordinator, there's a lot that you can do. So yeah, Marcus Davenport obviously is joining a team that has a ton of high hopes. At some point this summer, I'm going to write about like the Lions and sustainability from their perspective, as opposed to the sustainability talk that we always talk about with the Vikings, which is, hey man, they're winning close games. That's kind of weird, right? This is not really what the Lions questions there are. So I want to talk about that. Marcus Davenport is joining a team that is on the upside of that. That is like, hey, who knows if we're sustainable, but at least we're winning, right? And I think the Lions are a team that feel like they're really close, which is fair. They're in the NFC Championship game. Like, you get to feel close, right? And Marcus Davenport's just one of those moves. They like traded for a defensive back, like again, Carlton Davis from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I think they're just going to make a couple of more all-in moves. And Davenport is probably going to be part of our rotation as opposed to just a starter, but I think that that's going to be kind of interesting. Obviously, it didn't work out in Minnesota. The Vikings made a bet on injury history and value and age. And, he didn't really fulfill that just because the injury concerns resurfaced. But it's a bet that I think that Minnesota will continue to make unless it doesn't work out 3-4 times in a row, which with Zadarius Smith, it did work out, right? So we shouldn't even pretend that like this is the only time they've run that experiment and it failed. It's just we don't tend to remember that it was about as risky to get Zadarius Smith, and it just worked out that time. But yeah, the Marcus Davenport era has ended in Minnesota. Do you remember it? Because I kind of don't.
I actually just found a tweet that said the Davenport highlights reel from the Vikings. It was just a black screen for 12 seconds.
Okay, that's not complete. He did play. He did and the defense turned around the week that he started, right? Like the week that he started playing. Like he comes back and the defense suddenly gets good.
Marcus, and it just feels like Spark Davenport.
Sparkus Davenport, yeah.
You know what? Props.
Yeah, it's another.
Actually, that's.
Yeah.
I can appreciate that.
Perfect.
The interesting thing here is that with the signings we're about to discuss, Danielle Hunter seems likely that he's gone.
Yeah, I think I've seen projections around $25 million for him. I know Brad Spielberger puts him at like $22.5 million, I want to say, and he's been really good at projecting contracts this season. So props to him. But when you see a Pro Football Focus contract projection, like that's from Brad Spielberger, who did it, who works with Over the Cap at times to do like these contract things. It's a really great collaboration. So he's at 22.5. There's some reports out there that Hunter wants to model his deal off the Montez Sweat deal, which is I think 4 years, 98, which is basically 25 a year, like 24.5, I think. And it would be tough to have both that and the deals that they just brought in. And so, people kind of think that Hunter's on the way out. They've been trying to negotiate a long-term deal with Hunter for a while. They couldn't do it last year, so they just had a 1-year extension with some voids attached to it, and they weren't able to build that long-term deal. So it seems like he's gone, but we don't know that for sure. He hasn't signed, or he hasn't agreed to sign. No one has signed yet. He hasn't agreed to sign with another team, but it feels like a couple of other teams are interested, and that's a tough cap situation to figure out. It's possible. I discussed it on the show with Sam, Luke, and Luke. It's certainly possible to have both on the team, and that'd be really cool. But I feel like if it hasn't happened yet, it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, this seems more inevitable than not, which leads us to the Viking signings, which starts with Jonathan Grenard.
Yeah, so he's a Houston Texans pass rusher that is coming off of a really wonderful year. He is a really interesting case study in discussions of analytics and projections and sustainability. And this all kind of starts about a month ago when Seth Walder of ESPN Stats and Info tweets out that he thinks that Jonathan Grenard is a better signing than Danielle Hunter. And when asked, he says, when somebody is like, you mean for like the contracts that they'll sign, you'd rather have Grenard at his price than Danielle Hunter at his price. And he's like, no, straight up, I'd rather have Grenard. Which is fascinating, right? So Hunter's older. This is the first time in our lives we get to say, like, actually, Hunter has an age issue. Like, it's been a bit, right? Hunter's older. They both have injury histories. Hunter's injury history is obviously more extensive and a little bit less recent. But it's more extensive and concerning potentially. And we just saw some reporting about how it impacted his play, right? And so like it led, like the back issues led to a pec tear and he couldn't move his arms for a while. So, okay, fine. But one of the arguments was that Grenard had a better pass rush win rate than Danielle Hunter. And that is kind of an interesting thing to talk about, right? So pass rush win rate, so ESPN's tracking analytics tell us that the best way to predict future sacks, as well as predict a defense's ability to prevent points, and the best way to predict wins using a pass rusher statistic, which you have to understand is going to be a weak relationship regardless, is not through pressure rate, not through sack rate, not through total pressures, not through total sacks, but pass rush win rate. And so in using the chips in the pads, right, they track whether or not a pass rusher has a path to the quarterback relatively unimpeded by an offensive blocker. And if that happens within the first 2.5 seconds, that's a pass rush win. And that predicts stuff better than actual pressures do, and so on, right? And there's a bunch of really good examples of why you'd use win rate instead of pressure. Like, so for example, if a quarterback gets rid of the ball in, a second, that's not the pass rusher's fault that he couldn't log a pressure, right? That's the quarterback maybe even being influenced by how quickly that pass rush happened, getting rid of the ball quickly, right? And so that's going to be a short pass. That's going to be a 1-2 yard depth of field pass, if that. It could be a negative depth of target pass. That's a win for the defense, right? Because low depth of target passes are low expected value, and you force a situation where quarterback is essentially acting like he's pressured when he's not. And those don't get counted in pressure. So that's why you do pass rush win rate. What's really interesting is that this holds true for both ESPN's pass rush win rate, where Grenard is higher. He's a top 20 pass rush win rate guy. Danielle Hunter's not in the top 20. And ESPN's PFF's pass rush win rate. It also correlates much more strongly with future pressures, future sacks, future defensive points allowed, and future wins than pressures do. And they don't use the tracking data. They use their own human charting, right? A human subjectively determines, just way all statistics are determined, by the way. Who got a tackle? A human kind of determines it. How many yards do they get? A human kind of determines it. All statistics are subjective in the sense that someone is charting or deciding, right? Using their own judgment. PFF's tracking, including the grades, including the yards per whatever allowed, whatever, all of that is the same. When they have humans determine whether or not a pass rush was a win, not whether or not it was a pressure, but whether it was a win. And I haven't seen this talked about at all anywhere. PFF has a far higher pass rush, I shouldn't say far higher, a clearly higher pass rush win rate for Danielle Hunter over Jonathan Grenard. And I think a lot of the conversation over the past month, when this conversation has happened, which admittedly is not a lot, and I'm hyper focusing on it, but a lot of the conversation about Grenard that has happened, that has existed, has been about his high pass rush win rate. If you take a look at PFF's free agency guide, they talk about Grenard as a run first defender who has had success getting sacks and getting pressures, but is primarily good at stopping the run. And that leads to some pretty interesting, kind of how you filter that out. Because Mina Kimes just tweeted out today that you take a look at his high sack totals, right? So he had, I think, 8 sacks 3 years ago, like in 2021, right? And then in 2022, he gets injured partway through the season, so he doesn't get that many sacks. And then this year, he has a fairly high sack total. So let me pull it up just to be completely sure. But Mina Kimes tweets out, hey, his sack total is not like empty calories. His total pressures are not empty calories. So he had 12 and a half sacks this year. They are, a product of genuinely winning. Is one of the highest pass rush win rates in the NFL, and it's certainly among free agent edge rushers. It's not hustle sacks, it's not cleanup sacks. If you take a look at PFF's description of his pressures, 100% it's about hustle sacks and cleanup sacks. That's so curious to me. And so I looked at kind of the battery of grades and statistics that PFF has, and I wanted to break it down individually. So they do have a relatively high PFF run grade for Jonathan Grenard, which they don't for Danielle Hunter. So we'll use Danielle Hunter as a comparison. The percentage of positively graded run plays, which is a bit better than using stop rate. So stops are defensive tackles, in this case in the run game, that constitute a loss for the offense in some way. And they don't use EPA for this. They use the really old success rate statistics. So a success is any offensive play that gets 40% of the yards that you need to get a first down when you're on first down. So 40% of the yardage needed to convert on first down, 60% of the yardage needed to convert on second down, and then 100% of the yardage on third or fourth down. So that's the success metric that they use to determine a loss for the offense. So if they don't achieve that, that's a loss for run stop rate. And so a tackle for 2 yards on 1st and 10 is a stop. So even though it's not a tackle for loss, it's a good tackle. So even better than that is percentage positively graded run play, so that it would generally include stops unless they were unblocked, in which case you probably shouldn't give them too much credit for that, as well as plays where they're like squeezing the lane and forcing the runner to bounce outside, stuff like that. Much higher for Grenard this year than for Hunter. 18.6% versus 13.3%. Significant difference there, right? And on first down, same thing, 18.8% versus 15.2%. Now, it is important to me that Hunter's percentage of positively graded plays on first down in the run does increase because I think that when you know the run is coming and whatever, so that's important, right? And I'll talk about kind of longer term in a second. But in pass rush, Hunter outclasses Grenard in every capacity. So in PFF grade, 79 to 72. In pass win rate, 15.8%, which is one of the top 15 in the league, versus 13.2%. On pressure rate, 13.7 to 13.2. So Hunter's pressure rate is down and his win rate is up, whereas the pressure rate and pass rush win rate for Jonathan Grenard are identical. He wins, he gets pressure, basically. And when he doesn't win, he makes up for it with an unblocked pressure, right? Or when he wins and doesn't get a pressure, it's made up for with an unblocked pressure later on. It's basically identical. So Hunter's pressure rate is lower than his win rate, which suggests that there are pressures coming, like kind of down the pike. Third down pass rush win rate, huge win for Hunter. So on third down, your pass rush win rate goes up and your pressure rate goes up, just generally. And in fact, your sack rate nearly doubles on third down versus first down. That's just because, hey, the pass is coming, you can tee off, you don't have to defend the run, etc. Right? Third down pass rush win rate, Hunter has one of the best in the NFL at 19.2%. Jonathan Grenard is like whatever at 14.2%. Better than league average, certainly, but not eye-popping. Third down pressure rate, 19.2% for Hunter versus 20% for Hunter versus 19.7% for Grenard. So Grenard has a lot of unblocked pressures on third down. Now, Houston did not blitz very often, right? They were the 5th lowest in the league in blitz rate. So I find it really fascinating that it suggests here that Grenard has a really high unblocked pressure rate on third down, which are goosing his numbers. The third down pressure, the pass rush grade, 73.9 for Hunter, 58.6 for Grenard. So I am really curious, and at some point I'm just going to have to actually watch the guy, but I'm really curious about this distinction between these two essentially analytics firms on Grenard, his pass rush win rate, and how stable it is. But also, it should be noted, this is only for last year. You actually get a much more stable sample over a 3-year span, which of course includes, Hunter being injured at some point and then Grenard being injured last year. And if you take a look at all of the metrics that I just mentioned, over 3 years instead of one, it's not close, except for run defense. Grenard still continues to outpace Hunter in run defense, which for Hunter it's much better the prior 2 years, but than it was this last year. But Grenard continues to outpace Hunter in run defense, but he just gets, I'm not going to say he gets smoked because he's above average in all of these, but Hunter dominates in pass rush win rate, pressure grade, etc. Over a 3-year span. It's not particularly close. So I just find that kind of curious, right? About how all this happens. And the question about Hunter, oh my God, his sack rate always exceeds his pressure rate, which always exceeds his pass rush win rate. When is it going to come down to earth? It never does seem to come down to earth. His sack rate is really high and it's unsustainably high. The same thing is true for Grenard. Like I know that Mina is going off of the ESPN data, and maybe that is more relevant data here, but using the PFF data, his sack rate far exceeds his pressure rate and far exceeds his pass rush win rate, which suggests here that there's like kind of a bottom to find here. None of this is to say the Vikings signed a bad deal with Grenard. In fact, I like the deal. All I'm saying is that this is a super interesting case study on different or competing analytics that both seem to have predictive power here. And I would say that I would be very cautious in arguing that Grenard is any better than Hunter. Now, is he at 19 million better than Hunter at 25 million? Maybe, probably. I actually wouldn't fall on that side of it. I'd still probably rather have Hunter, but I think there's a good argument there, right? But I don't think there's a great argument for straight up being better. And I'm really curious about this conversation about whether or not they're empty calories or not. And I think when you want to move away from PFF, you want to move away from analytics, and you want to take a look at what defensive line and offensive line experts have to say, I'm still going to defer to Brandon Thorne here, who admittedly does not have, as far as I can tell, a write-up on Grenard from this year. That includes this most recent season that gave him this much value. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. My bad. But Hunter has been always highly regarded, both by Brandon Thorne and to all of the NFL offensive linemen that he talks to, many of whom are all pros or Pro Bowlers. He does a survey at the beginning of every year of 8 or so offensive tackles and guards that have been in the Pro Bowl or All Pro or whatever, right? And he's like, hey, who's your best edge rusher? And Hunter ranked 6th in that at the beginning of this year, and he had a pretty good year. So I'm curious about that, because it feels like the defensive line film nerds really like Hunter a lot more than Grenard. They don't dislike Grenard. And the analytics guys, it kind of depends on where their data is coming from. So I find that curious. I think Grenard could be a very good player. This is not like a Grenard is bad point, but it's just like hey, we should talk about this, because it's this is not as clear cut as it seems. And the data kind of points in multiple directions depending on how you treat it.
So the other signing of note was Andrew Van Ginkel. There was also Blake Cashman as well.
Andrew Van Ginkel is pretty interesting just because he hasn't had a ton of full-time experience. He played a full season in 21 and a full season in 23. And as a full-time edge rusher in 2023, he was pretty good. But in 21, he wasn't all that great. Mind you, that was his second year in the league. So, whatever, or actually third. He's this is a 6th year because he signed a short extension, I think. With the Dolphins. Anyway, in 2022, he played kind of a rotational role and was okay at it. But yeah, he's coming off of a pretty good season where he was pretty productive. and ended up replacing Jalen Phillips. So like he was going to be a rotational guy, ends up filling in. He was a 5th-round pick, so I don't think there was like a ton of expectation. And his ability to kind of produce, I think, kind of despite that situation where like he wasn't going to be the starter. Obviously spoke well of him and ended up earning him this contract with the Vikings. And this is like kind of the first time, because I still think the Vikings need a starting edge rusher, but this is the first time, they generate somebody or they bring in somebody that has got the ability to be an actual pass rusher from a rotational role. This is like way better than like, hey, your primary backup is DJ Wanham, and then after that it's Patrick Jones, right? Like it just feels like if they get a starter, right, the Van Ginkel signing is like a commitment to making sure that they've got somebody deep. So either that is, re-signed to Neil Hunter, which again, I still think is possible in the cap environment that they're in, or, draft somebody. It's a top heavy draft. So maybe you're not going to get an edge rusher unless you get, Luke's guy, Chop Robinson. I like him a lot too. So it's not like, but, or a Dallas Turner or whoever, right? Unless you get somebody in the first round, it might be tough finding a guy, but there's guys sprinkled throughout the draft. But yeah, you take a look at kind of the way that he's produced over the years and when he's in a rotational position versus a starting position, I think he's stronger. I mean, almost everybody is stronger as a rotational guy, but I think that he's been stronger playing a rotational role, but he just had a pretty good year as a full-time pass rusher when he did end up taking over. Now, all of that stuff that I mentioned about Grenard, right, about pass rush win rate, about pass rush grade on true pass sets, on pass rush grade, on run defense, whatever, Van Ginkel clears all of it. Again, primarily as a rotational guy, where your grades are just going to look a lot better because not only are you less exhausted or less fatigued, but also rotational guys come in on third down. And I just mentioned that all of your statistics improve pretty drastically on third down. This is a lesson from when Daniil Hunter and Khalil Mack were being compared back when Khalil Mack was still in Chicago, and Daniil Hunter over I think it was the same number of snaps, had more pressures and more sacks and all that. And he produced better numbers than Mack. And I was like, Mack's still a better player. Like, you can't fool me. And people were like, well, what do you mean? And it's like, well, for the first 2 years of Daniil Hunter's career, he was coming in only on third down when all of your stuff gets doubled, right? If you remove the 2 years where he was a rotational guy and only look at the last 3 years when they were both starters, Mack clears. So it's not really, you can't really just take a look at it's not that helpful that Daniil Hunter was a better guy 5 years ago when Mack wasn't even in the league or whatever. Well, I guess Mack was in the league, but like 5 years ago when he wasn't even starting, like that's not relevant. Like if he's not better last year, and if he's not better the year before or the year before that, that's it. Well, it's kind of the same thing with Van Ginkel, where it's like, well, he's coming in a lot, but he's not starting most of the time. And so that brings up a question of like, hey, this guy is in the 90th percentile of most of these pass rushing statistics that help us predict wins, right? Not very high in sack percentage, right? Not crazy high in pursuit pressure rate, right? Like his rate of cleanup pressures is really, really low, which means that we're not getting a ton of pressures that you get to add to the stat total and say, hey, he's one of the league leaders in pressures per pass rush. He didn't get the cleanup pressures that he would have wanted in that situation. That didn't happen. Well, in true pass rushing situations where there's not like a play action, it's not a screen, there's like 2 seconds at least in the pocket, a win produces a pressure. In those situations, he is in the 90th percentile. That I think is valuable. And so this guy is like a plus rotational guy, kind of like when Hunter first arrived and it was like Brian Robinson and Everson Griffin and Hunter was the backup. I feel like the quality of player, maybe not the potential, but the quality of player is what you get with Van Ginkel here. And maybe if he's forced to be a starter because the Vikings, couldn't move things around enough to get a starter either in the draft or whatever, it's not that bad. He's kind of like, as pass rushers go, he's a little bit smaller. He's no Davenport, right? But I think that his ability to kind of move helps. He does actually have a fair amount of experience as like an off-ball guy, especially at Wisconsin, but a little bit in the NFL. And so he might drop off. Like this is actually pretty good for building a blitz package for like a Brian Flores defense, where this guy's doesn't always have to rush the passer. He can move well enough to play well in coverage, and it'll allow you to kind of move people around and blitz from unusual and interesting angles, and rush 5 and look like you're rushing 6 and all that. I'm a fairly versatile guy that I think somebody like a Brian Flores could use a lot better than like somebody like a Jim Schwartz, who's a very good defensive coordinator, but doesn't do a great job with the versatile edge rushers. Really good job with the versatile linebackers, but not edge rushers. And so, yeah, I don't know. This is like a pretty good free agency group. Like it's hard to be upset.
And of course, Blake Cashman as well.
Yeah. Minnesota guy coming home. That's great. It's really interesting because I was talking to somebody that's kind of interested in both the market for Frankie Louvu and Blake Cashman at the not the Senior Bowl, at the Combine. I was talking to them and I was like, and they were like, "Hey, well, who do you like more?" And I was like, "Frankie Louvu. I think that he's just a better player." And he's like, "Well, who do you think teams like more?" And I was like, "I don't think that is different. I think teams like Frankie Louvu more." And they were like, "Well, I mean, I agree with you that I think Frankie Louvu is a better player, but his manner of versatility is not that highly valued by teams, maybe by the Vikings." And I think the Vikings might have been interested in him. I'm not sure. But Blake Cashman is getting a lot more offers because he's a traditional linebacker. And I was like, oh man, that's weird. Like in retrospect, that the Vikings are like, hey, we got to get this traditional linebacker. When you take a look at the linebacker group that the Vikings have, like they desperately need one, right? Because like one of them is just a safety. It's Josh Metellus, right? Like that's just a safety, right? He's meets in the safety room. He's in the safety meeting rooms. He coaches with the defensive backs, right? Like that's Josh Metellus. He's a safety. Another one is a blitzer. That's Ivan Pace. He's a rookie blitzer. And who else is there? Jordan Hicks is gone, right? So having a traditional linebacker is actually really useful, especially if like you don't want Andrew Van Ginkel to just play linebacker a lot. He's best as an edge rusher, right? Like that's what he's going to do. He could probably manage as an off-ball guy, but you don't sign him to do that. So getting Blake Cashman in is fine. I think that he's played fairly well. I think that his PFF grades kind of overstate the quality of player that he's been, but he's not been bad. And though he struggled in New York back when the Jets couldn't figure out what their defense was going to do, which, I mean, credit to the Jets, a weird thing to say. Their defense has been they've figured it out over the past 2 years. Getting displaced by Quincy Williams kind of sucks. Fair enough. But with the Houston Texans, he's done a pretty good job. And I think that I don't think that he could be kind of a linebacker that defines a defense in the same way that like Patrick Queen or actually I shouldn't say Patrick Queen. I don't actually think that he's all that great. Roquan Smith, maybe the better of the two Ravens linebackers, that Roquan Smith can or that Fred Warner can or whatever, right? Like I don't think that he can do that. But I think that within a particular role, he could be a really valuable player. And he's done a pretty good job as a coverage linebacker, as a guy getting from like 4 yards deep into the box to get a run stop. Like he reads fairly quickly, which again, you didn't really actually see that a ton in 2021. But he's been playing pretty fast and loose, I think, in a good way. And he didn't miss that many tackles. He's been able to blitz a little bit. But I just think that in terms of somebody who can just play linebacker, which is like, I wasn't looking at those guys, right? Like I know the Vikings needed a linebacker, but I kept on looking like, hey, Brian Flores will know how to use this guy because he's kind of unique and quirky like this way. Or, hey, he'll know how to use this guy. And it's like, hey, they just got like a linebacker, like capital L, capital B linebacker, and he plays linebacker. And he'll blitz a couple of times, but mostly he'll read his keys and get to the hole and squeeze the lane and allow like a will linebacker or something to kind of get the real tackle. But when he does have a tackle opportunity, he does a pretty good job. I like him. I think this is a good deal. I don't think that, like, I think that this is a situation where if I remember the deal correctly, like Spielberger under predicted his market. I think he went like Spielberger said $5 million a year. But overall, I think that it's a fine signing at a position where the Vikings absolutely needed a guy. This is not a great draft for linebackers, and it just hasn't been for a while. It's like college is not producing these guys. So finding a dude, maybe not a Fred Warner, but like a dude, I think that's useful. So, this is not, I don't think this is game changing. In fact, I don't think he'll play better than Jordan Hicks played last year, but I think he'll play better than Jordan Hicks will play this year. And I think that's pretty valuable.
The Vikings also re-signed 2 offensive linemen. We had Blake Brandel and David Quessenberry.
Yeah, not a lot to say. Both backups. Blake Brandel was supposed to be a sixth man 2 years ago, and then last year he was mostly an interior swing. He was entirely an interior swing guy, and they relied on Quessenberry to be the outside backup, which I find interesting because I like Brandel as a tackle more than I like him as a guard. But the Vikings were keeping him at guard. Either way, he's a good player. Signing both, I don't think Quessenberry is outstanding, but you could do a lot worse at backup tackle. So yeah, it's a decent way to start out your free agencies by announcing re-signings of 2 guys at a position where historically you've needed a lot of depth to compete.
So we've got all of that, and well, we don't have a quarterback really on. Well, we have 2 signed quarterbacks, but I don't think any of us is really comfortable with either of those options. You have a couple of rumors, including Sam Darnold as a potential person to come in for the Vikings.
Yeah, Ben Volin tweeted out that the Vikings are interested in Sam Darnold, who obviously was just with the 49ers. Before that, he was with the Panthers, and before the Panthers, it was the Jets. Whenever someone mentions Sam Darnold, if like a lot of people at Vikings Twitter are like, "Oh my God, no way, I can't believe this! What an awful signing!" And it's like, yeah, I'd prefer Jacoby Brissett too, but he's signing with the Patriots. What are you going to do, right? I get it, but like, I think people are over focusing on what Sam Darnold did when he was with the Jets uniform, and not after that, because he wasn't bad after that. Like obviously the first year in Carolina with Matt Rule, that was not wonderful. That wasn't great.
That also included Matt Rule.
Yeah, it's just free pass, honestly. So like, okay, great. When Matt Rule was gone, like literally the moment he left and Steve Wilkes took over Carolina, Sam Darnold was named the starter again, and he was very good, like in an uncomfortable way. Like, that Sam Darnold? Like, my Sam Darnold? That guy? like the ginger? Like, he's kind of caveman-y? That guy? Yeah, that guy. He's kind of good. And then spot duty for Shanahan in the 49ers, kind of good. Like, ranked 11th in EPA over the last 2 years. Now, I don't think that, like, if the Vikings sign him and they start him, that he's going to be the 11th best quarterback in the NFL. That's not why I pointed out that he ranked 11th in EPA. It's rather, he's probably a better quarterback than you think or remember, because nobody watched Carolina after they fired their head coach. And honestly, before that either. Nobody was watching Carolina. They saw that Sam Darnold lost a competition to Baker Mayfield. They saw that Baker Mayfield was bad. They saw Baker Mayfield got traded to Los Angeles, where he was kind of good, a little bit. And, oh, Sam Darnold's the starter. Okay, well, what's he going to do without Christian McCaffrey? Turns out a decent amount. Not amazing, right? I think his numbers were better than his play. I think he was like 6th in EPA or something insane like that. But like pretty good. He was like managing the pocket all right. He was accurate. He was on time. I remember I was doing, back when I was doing like kind of like live broadcasting stuff, we were watching, I think it was like Saints Jets or something crazy like that. I was talking to Seth Galina, and we were talking about like Sam Darnold, and I was like, I don't get it, man. You've always liked Sam Darnold. What is up? Like, why do you like Sam Darnold? Or why did you like him coming out of the draft? I think at that point he had stopped liking him, but it was just like, why did you like him coming out of the draft? I thought it was all there. He's like, I just thought he had all the tools. He could get through his reads pretty quickly. He had a pretty good arm. He was a pretty good athlete, and he was reasonably accurate. The only thing is that he needed to cut down on his turnovers. And I was like, Seth, that's the whole game. That's the whole thing. Aside from that, how was the play, right? Like, yeah. Mrs. Lincoln, right? Like that. Yeah, man, he's got to cut down on the turnovers. That sucks. Maybe he's done that. Maybe he did the whole thing and then he cut down on turnovers. So I'm not saying like if the Vikings sign him, he's a franchise guy. I'm saying that there are definitely worse bridge quarterbacks, and I think people are overestimating how poor of a quarterback he is. So if the Vikings like draft like, I don't know, Michael Penix in the 2nd round and they sign Sam Darnold, it's not like, oh, Michael Penix is absolutely going to win this quarterback competition, and if he doesn't, he's doomed, right? He lost to Sam Darnold. It's like, oh, man, you remember how bad Geno Smith was with the Jets? Let's chill for like a second. Yeah. And maybe there's something here, because there's evidence that maybe there's something here. So I'm curious. I think it wouldn't be a bad signing.
So there's also a question because of the fact that we don't really have a starting running back, and the Packers just got rid of theirs. Aaron Jones, apparently there's some interest.
Yeah, Diana Rossini tweets out that the Vikings, I guess, are. In fact, I think the only one that she tweeted, I didn't read the story, so the only team she tweeted out was the Vikings, which she added in, of course, which is a surprising amount of awareness about what the Vikings are doing from a person who used to cover the Washington Commanders. Not an insult, a compliment. It's great that you picked up on that trend. But yeah, so the Packers spent a lot of money to grab Josh Jacobs, which, okay, look, like Aaron Jones is a second contract running back and it didn't work out. Josh Jacobs is about to be, I mean, technically a third, but essentially a second contract running back. Um, it would suck if he's good. And it did suck when Aaron Jones was good. But Aaron Jones stopped being good when he got a second contract. He's expensive, right? Like, I'm not going to say he stopped being good, actually. I think that's overdoing. He actually was fine. It was A.J. Dillon who was like bad. He was just injured.
A.J. right? Dillon, the one that, if I remember correctly, Justice was ready to put into the Hall of Fame.
Yes. Yeah, I think when A.J. Dillon was a rookie, he's already a better player than Aaron Jones. At that time, Aaron Jones was like leading the league in touchdowns. We were like, Justice. Like 100%.
Never looking back. This train ain't derailing.
Yeah. Justice, who also put Romeo Doubs into the Hall of Fame during the preseason.
Yes.
Get him fitted for that jacket.
Complete with the jacket image, yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, Aaron Jones is fine. He just gets hurt a lot, which like is the whole deal with second contract running backs. Like, I don't know if you remember this guy named Dalvin Cook was kind of an issue, right? Derrick Henry and Christian McCaffrey are tricking people. These second contract guys are, I don't know. Anyway, the Packers did it, so I can criticize them for doing it. If the Vikings do it, I'm going to praise them for it, right? That's a totally different.
Yeah.
But I'm curious because I don't know what Aaron Jones' market is because of the injury history. I assume it'll be like smaller than Josh Jacobs' market, which was like 11? I forget what they signed him for. But like Tony Pollard signed for like 8, and I think Spielberger projected like 6, so that was kind of interesting. DeAndre Swift signed for 8 too. So this running back market might be a little bit more inflated than we thought, and I would have maybe projected Aaron Jones with his injury history and his age and position might sign for 7, maybe 6, and now that guys who are signing for 6 or were supposed to sign for 6 are getting 8, maybe he goes for 9, 10. And at that point, I'm just like, all right, if that would be the difference between like getting a starting edge rusher, right? Again, maybe Van Ginkel is a starting edge rusher, and I'm being a little bit too harsh, but like if the other $3 million is the difference between a starting edge rusher and the difference between Aaron Jones and whatever running back you were going to get instead, I don't know. Luke Braun has been on this like anti-analytics thing about running backs, and he's like, just sign guys. It's only like $11 million. And I just like, I get where that's coming from because it's a lot less than it used to be, and the running back market has corrected a lot. But like, I still don't want to overpay a guy by $3 million. Like, that's too much at running back. Like, you still, like, we have experienced like at the point at which running backs do matter, right? Like, it's the Alexander Madison line. Like, oh yeah, okay. Oh, we got Matt Asiata. Okay, yeah. Well, now it matters. It matters that we get rid of this guy and get a good guy in. I get it.
As it turns out. And Saquon's now an Eagle, so
right. So there's a floor to mattering.
Yeah,
but there's also a ceiling, and I don't know if I'm willing to push $3 extra million. So Aaron Jones, kind of interesting, kind of exciting, injury concern, but like what he played, he was pretty good last year before. Like, I don't know, man. The Packers running game was a mess, but mostly because he was hurt, not because he was bad. Obviously very good at forcing missed tackles, obviously a pretty decent receiver. He's like 80th percentile in yards after contact, 95th percentile in just rushing grade, which accounts for, forcing misses before contact arrives. So it's not just yards after contact, vision, stuff like that. Really good in zone, really great in gap. I don't know, versatile guy. I just like am concerned about injury, but like if he's in a committee, which he's always been in a committee, if he's in a committee with Ty Chandler, it's not as bad, but it's like, I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
I'm concerned. It's probably fine.
Well, let's go to the mailbag, and the first question is from NFL Left, who asks, at the same price, which quarterback is the best fit for right now? Darnold. We're going to take Minshew out since he got signed.
He just signed, yeah.
Yep. Trey Lance, Jameis, or Tannehill?
That's interesting. You listed 4 names, but only 3 quarterbacks. I don't know what that safety is doing there.
Yeah, well.
So best fit for right now. I don't like. What does that mean? Because I don't know if the Vikings are going to get like a rookie. If they get a rookie quarterback, I am probably going Sam Darnold. If they don't, I'm probably going Jameis. Right, and the reason is because Jameis is either going to win you or lose you games. That's it. His whole job is to be the center of the reason why a game has an outcome. Right. He's throwing picks and he's throwing touchdowns, and there's not much in between. Cool. You don't have a guy that could take over. You might as well try, right? You might as well just put the ball in the end zone for somebody. Hopefully you, right? Losing by 3 is the same as losing by 50 kind of thing. But if there's a bridge quarterback situation, yeah, Sam Darnold can keep the ship afloat for a little while without making too many mistakes. Hopefully, again, he had a turnover problem, right? But like last 2 years, maybe not. And then when your guy is ready, your guy is ready. Tannehill, I think, is just cooked. I think he's done. I think he's cooked. That's it for him. Trey Lance is a safety.
It was interesting to see Tannehill kind of have his resurgence in Tennessee until it like faded out. Like it was good that good that he got a second chance on that. But yeah, it seems like Tannehill's done. Adam asks, excluding all stats, grades, or anything objective, how that could be helpful. How would you rate the Vikings additions today in terms of straight up vibes?
How
are the vibes?
The Cashman vibes are really good. I like the Cashman vibes. The Grenard vibes, I don't love. It's very nerd, very, hey, I was making fun of this 3 days ago. Why are you showing me up like this? Don't love that. Don't love those vibes. Van Ginkel, I think as a profile of a player, decent vibes, looks like a Viking. That rules. Like, cool. You look like a Viking, and you do some interesting stuff. You're versatile. That's fun. But with a name like that, there's a vibe ceiling, right? I don't know. That one's a tough one for me. I'm gonna go positive, negative, neutral in that order. So positive vibes for Cashman, negative vibes for Bernard, neutral vibes for Van Ginkel, just because of that name, man. That's it. It's the only reason. Otherwise, those would be positive too. The
vibe ceiling. Wow.
Well, yeah. I mean, come on. He's got a Dutch name. What do you want me to do? There's a vibe ceiling.
Raul asks, with the defensive signings, how would you readjust draft strategy for the defense? Are we in the market for a nose tackle like DeAndre Sweat, or does Harrison Phillips satisfy that role?
I don't think that they're super in the market for a nose tackle. And Devondre Sweat is like definitely a run defense only guy. He's got a ton of lateral agility and pass rush athleticism for a 360-pound guy, and he doesn't like use it in pass rushing situations. So it's just like, oh, okay, well, glad that exists for no reason. But he's a really great run blocker or run stuffer, so he's interesting. But no, I don't think so. I think Harrison Phillips mostly fulfills that role. I think they're mostly looking for pass rush. I think like you de-emphasize the importance of edge rusher. I think it reduces the likelihood that they would feel the need to draft a Chop Robinson or Dallas Turner or Elias Ulatu or Jared Verse, right? Like it reduces the impetus to do that if you've got an equally highly graded, like let's say cornerback there. If you're like, hey, Terrion Arnold or Chop Robinson, normally I would take Chop, but we've got a pass rush solution, so I'll take Terrion Arnold. So I think it does adjust it a little bit, but I don't think it's massive. Like I think they still need corners. They still at some point need an edge rusher. They still probably want to invest in a mid-round or late-round linebacker. So I don't think any of that really changes on defense.
Raul also asks, regarding the rumors with the Darnold, Fields, etc., is there any reason to add one of these guys instead of rolling with Mullins, already under contract, and the guy we draft?
It would not shock me if Darnold was a better quarterback than Mullins. And again, I do think the point of the whole thing is to win as many games as possible. Like, I get the feel to like, tank, right? Especially if you don't get a quarterback. But like, I like, yeah, when they win. So I think Darnold gives you a better shot over Mullins, who's just out of control. Super exciting game. So he does have that going for him, but kind of out of control. I don't know what the rumors say about Fields. That would be, I haven't seen a Fields to Vikings rumor, but that would be fun. It's probably the most fun because there's like a lot of potential to untap there that probably won't get untapped, but at least you get to talk about it for a couple of weeks.
Pete asks, what has Kwesi done in his time here to actually improve the roster? It feels like we're just in a worse place than we were 3 years ago.
So I don't think that. So this is something like I tweeted out, like, hey, so Paul Charchian of KFan Fantasy Guy was like, hey, do you really trust Kwesi to get the quarterback right? I'm like, why wouldn't? There's no reason to trust or not trust him to get the quarterback right. He's like had Kirk. Like he didn't make a move. Like, do you think the Mullins move was bad? Because I think that was good. Do you think the Dobbs move was bad? Because I think that was great. Mullins was injured, right? And so they needed a backup to their rookie. And Dobbs way outperformed the expectations of a fourth string quarterback. Like, I don't care that he ended up sucking. Like, he way outperformed a fourth string quarterback. Was the Hall pick bad? I don't know, man. He's a rookie, a fifth round rookie. I think he overperformed his slot too. Like, yeah, he didn't play well, but I think he overperformed. So I don't know. The only options that we've had to evaluate his ability to acquire quarterbacks, to me, have all been positive. And the fact that Nick Mullins got hurt and put these guys into the rotation is not a fault of evaluation from Kwesi. Like, that all makes sense. As for, are we in a worse place than before? I don't think that's a fair question at all, because when Kwesi was brought in, the whole point was to like build a roster that could make the playoffs. 100% did that 2 years in a row, right? The Vikings didn't make the playoffs last year, but like if Kirk's healthy, they definitely make the playoffs. No question on my mind. And that's not Kwesi's fault. Kirk has never been hurt before. Well, enough to miss a game. Unless you count COVID as an injury, which fair enough if you do. But the point, I think, remains, right?
Yeah.
That, Kirk didn't get hurt. Suddenly he gets hurt. Oh my God, they actually have an Iron Man quarterback actually has a good backup quarterback situation. That's nuts. That's good moves, man. And so now that the Vikings are in a spot where they're actually restarting, which they just haven't done that, like, in a long time. Like, Kirk wasn't part of a restart. He was part of an already building process. Like, they started in 2014. That was them starting. That was like drafting Anthony Barr and Teddy Bridgewater. And hey, we got this like young Xavier Rhodes guy. Can he turn into somebody good? Hey, Harrison Smith's had a good first 2 years. Like, that's a team that started. It has been a decade since the Vikings have been starting. And now that they're starting, yeah, the roster looks worse than it did than when they were competing for the playoffs. But I think that the direction of the franchise is a lot better than it was 2 years ago, because now they have a direction, right? Like 2 years ago, it was like, hey, we got to be always rebuilding and always competing, and we got to make the playoffs, and we have to, draft good players and stuff like that. Like, yeah, the 22 draft wasn't great. Ed Ingram is turning out to be a better player than a lot of us thought. So I think we have to reevaluate our biases on that. Obviously, the other Ed Ingram stuff, that's like a you thing. And I very much sympathize with it. But the Lewis Cine pick didn't work out. The Andrew Booth pick didn't work out. I would argue that the Caleb Evans pick was actually good. Like, I think he's outperforming a fourth round corner. Like, I think you don't usually get a high quality backup out of that spot. So that's good. I think that he did a good job there. And so the fact that he's not a starter is not a failure of that pick. Ed Ingram is playing all right to pretty well. That draft is not as catastrophic as I think people think. It's not good. It's not a good draft. I don't think it's nearly as catastrophic as people think. And on last year's draft, I don't have any complete. Jordan Addison is pretty good. Mekhi Blackman is doing all right. I don't know. They just didn't have a second round pick. So we're like evaluating these third, fourth, fifth round guys like they're starters. And it's like, I don't know. So I don't think that there's anything wrong that Kwesi has done. And his free agency stuff has been fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I think grabbing Darius Smith was great. I think Harrison Phillips was good. The Jordan Hicks signing turned out actually pretty well. Like, props, right? Byron Murphy's fine.
Hawkinson.
Hawkinson, great move. Great move getting Hawkinson. Like, it sucks they don't have a third round pick this year. They'll live, right? Um, like, the only thing is Josh Oliver, and the thing is, I think people just expected him to catch more passes than he did. Is still an insanely good blocker, and it showed up. Like, the Vikings have had, on the whole, very good run blocking. The running backs just have not been able to take care of it. So I don't know. I feel like he's been doing a good job. Is the roster set up to win this year in a way that it was in 2022? No. Is the direction of the team a little bit more clear, and is the ceiling higher? Yes. So I do think that they're on the right path and that he's done some stuff to earn the benefit of the doubt. I don't think it's fair to say we're in a worse place than we were 3 years ago, because the goals 3 years ago were different than they are now.
Vikings Jack asks, what is the next owner of Kirk Cousins' Minnesota home going to put in the indent his builder made for him for a Super Bowl trophy?
Oh my God. Oh my God. That's like too small to be like a man cave where like you watch games, right?
Yep.
Like that's, well, I can't say that on iTunes. This is just like a walk-in closet, but attached to a hallway. Like I can't. This is not a bedroom, a hall. Like what?
I mean, I had something similar in my like first apartment in St. Paul, but like it wasn't Super Bowl trophy shaped. I remember just putting pictures in it.
Yeah, you just gotta like. Well, okay, so the whole area, you turn it. Maybe you could turn it into a man cave, and then that is for a fridge. Is it too narrow for a fridge?
Probably.
Yeah, you could. I don't know. Put a wine fridge in there. You could figure something out.
Wine fridge, wine towel, something like that.
Yeah.
Luke Braun asks, now that the Vikings have fully embraced wokeism at the quarterback position, who is the most woke option available to take the reins?
So someone immediately responded with Justin Fields, and like for the obvious reasons, yeah, obviously. But then we're like, well, hold on, we don't like not 100% that this is more woke than Cousins. Is he vaccinated? Yes, he's vaccinated. And then someone's like, hey, he's vegan. Well, that's really woke. And then someone responded, well, actually, he's not vegan anymore. He's pescatarian. And though I think when you describe the two diets, vegan is more woke than pescatarian. Pescatarian feels more pretentious, which is obviously woke.
Well, yeah,
right?
it's the additional syllables in it. Yeah.
Yeah, you throw in other syllables. What are you, the New York Times? Get out of here. It's woke. It's so woke. So I think Justin Fields is probably the most woke option. Sam Darnold, definitely not woke. He is from California. He's from Orange County. So he does have that, but he doesn't have the woke profile. And he did play on an East Coast team. He does have those. But I just think, especially from Chicago, Justin Fields, Chicago, that's kind of woke. I mean, like, I know he's not from Chicago, but that's kind of woke. So I don't know. It's kind of hard to see more woke options. Tyrod Taylor, maybe. But like, other than that, that's tough.
Yeah.
I can't. Like, if Andrew Luck was available, that feels woke, but like, he's not.
Well, E.T. Spaceman asks, what was your favorite Kirk moment? The voice crack, yeeting his shoe, lining up under guard? Perhaps when all of his passes kept getting batted down that one year?
Yeah, that was weird, wasn't it?
That was remarkable. It just kept going.
And it was like, well, in his history, we don't have that, so why is it happening now? And then you ask him, and he'd be like, I don't know. That's kind of weird, huh? We're like, yeah, fix it. What? We all agree it's weird, but you have the control on this one. No, my favorite Kirk moment is obviously the plexiglass box.
Oh, proposal. Yes. Boy, I forgot about that one.
He's like, hey, man, I am 100% not getting vaccinated. But to make sure that nobody gets COVID, what if we invented a solution where I'm in a box? Like, oh, okay, man. Just your body, but that is a lot of burden on the rest of us.
Yeah. Maybe if we all just ended up in a box instead.
Yeah, right. And you're not in the box. I think they have a name for that. I think it's called quarantine. No, you don't like that? Okay.
Yeah. Fraternal Order of the NKVD asks, did Kirk really win that playoff game, or did Breeze and Hill lose it? That was overtime. That was Kirk winning overtime. It.
But it was like, man, it was a pretty bad fourth quarter from Kirk until like the final drive too. It was like
it was. But if you remember that overtime drive and that just moonshot to Thielen.
I mean, yeah. Well, was the moonshot to Thielen in the fourth quarter, or was that in overtime?
That was in overtime. That was right before the score. Like to me, that means that Kirk won the playoff game.
Right, and we just got to look at the last thing that happened, and that's the defining feature.
Look, you said earlier, losing by 3 is the same as losing by 30. Like, I refuse to give the Saints credit.
So here's the thing. With the Minneapolis Miracle, that's definitely like the Saints were effing around just slightly too much after they came back, right? Because it was actually going to be a Saints comeback story, right?
Yes.
And so that one's definitely like Case Keenum and Stephon Diggs won the game, right? Because the Saints got a little bit loose, but it's not on Brees. Like they already made the comeback, and they should have just held on for a little bit longer. That's on the defense. It's on Case Keenum. It feels like it's not that dramatic because they did like collapse a little bit. But it was another situation where it was like, oh my God, we finally figured out this Everson Griffin thing and Andrew Sendejo thing. What are these guys doing? Oh my God, we could finally score. Holy crap. And then Cousins was like, "Oh God, I totally forgot to be good in the fourth quarter. Oh, okay, let's take care of this.
Let's fix this quick."
Yeah, I think it was Cousins. I'd say that Cousins more than Hill and Brees.
Yes. Pessimistic Minnesota sports fan asks, if Cousins had been named Ken and not Kirk, would he have been able to bring Ryan Gosling levels of Kenergy to the Vikings?
It would not have been Knuff. I'm sorry.
Literally, I was about to ask, would he have been enough to lead the Vikings to a Super Bowl?
It would have been nice, but there's only so many Ryan Goslings that you can have, and right now he's in Detroit, right? Like there's not, yeah.
Kenneth Allen asks, how much culture whiplash will there be going from generic family man Kirk Cousins to villain/bully from an 80s high school drama, Sam Darnold?
Oh Jesus! Oh my God! I kind of dig that. Like it's been a bit like the 80s villain is like the 80s high school bully is just not been a thing, and it just hasn't been in vogue. And it's time for that guy to be a protagonist and actually good.
Yeah,
it's time. That's crazy unwoke, by the way. So you could bring Sam Darnold in, despite the East Coast and West Coast bias that he has, which is incredible.
Do those?
I didn't even mention the San Francisco thing. When I said he's from California, I meant he's from Orange County. That's like where he went to high school.
Yeah, they cancel out.
Yeah. Oh, they cancel out. Oh, yeah. He's just good middle America, but not Chicago, but middle America. No, he's crazy woke, but then he's a high school bully, right? So, it's time for that guy to have his moment, but as like a good guy, not like we should redeem the bully, but rather the guy who's the prototypical bully should get to be the good guy. I'm
reminded of a Rick and Morty episode where a high school bully was going after Morty and said, "That's what bullies call a fait accompli or something like that." Just something completely out of character for a bully to say. And just that like
rules.
I was like, wow, dude. You're taking it there. All right, cool.
Netflix has been trying to innovate on the high school bully, and I mean, I haven't been watching these shows, so I could be getting it wrong. I'm mostly consuming it through video clips on Twitter. So, like, let's be clear. I don't know what I'm talking about most of the time, usually, but especially not here.
I want the out of context account to come back for that so badly.
But like the innovations of the high school bullies seem to be really bad. Like one of them is just like a social justice cheerleader who sees. My understanding of this clip is that she sees a guy like the quarterback of the football team or something like that. He gets accepted into a college and he wears the college gear, and on the gear is like a racist mascot, right? And she's like, "Oh, I see you're wearing." She's not saying it in these words exactly. I'm paraphrasing. "Oh, I see you're wearing like the racist gear. I'm going to get you canceled. And through you getting canceled, they're going to pull your scholarship to the school whose gear you're wearing, which is the reason you're getting canceled, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And that's like the whole. Do you know what I'm talking about? I remember this vividly because I was like, what is going on? Like, you might be able to build a good bully out of like this woke scold stuff or whatever, like maybe. But first, you got to be like real good at writing because it's going to come off crazy otherwise. And this makes no sense. What are you doing? So I just feel like we're probably not going to get that. So we should just redeem the bully archetype in unexpected ways, like on Rick and Morty, rather than invent a new bully. Because I feel like when Netflix does it, at least it's like, oh, you've not been to a high school ever, much less the last 20 years.
It's like, no, actually, I've been living on an island. Nolan Kaler asks, which former Viking sings better, Kirk Cousins or Blake Crowell?
It's got to be Blake Crowell, right? Like, I know Kirk Cousins did the musical in high school. I know that we can find those clips. It's got to be Blake Crowell. I
would have to
country
assume
music star Blake Crowell.
Yeah, country music star Blake Crowell. QAM X-Storm asks, do you think the Atlanta front office and fans are aware of the cadre of weirdo Kirk stans that they are inheriting that will make everyone on social media miserable for the next 4 years? How much better will Vikings Twitter be now that these people are gone?
That's interesting. Well, okay, so to be clear, there's a portion of Vikings Twitter that are Kirk stans because he's the quarterback. And so they are Vikings fans who stan Kirk. And then they got like mad, I guess, that he went to Atlanta. So those guys are still staying, and they'll still be weird and probably irrational about the next quarterback. Sometimes there's like weird motivations behind who they like at quarterback and who they don't, right? It's not that they're a Kirk stan, but man, they sure do like Kirk a lot more than Teddy for some reason. Let's not investigate that.
Their girlfriends too seem to be very interested in a very specific type of fellow.
Pocket passers.
Yeah, it's clearly pocket passers, and not people that are runners or
they just play quarterback the way it's meant to be played.
Yeah,
real face of the franchise type guys.
Rush Limbaugh was famous about standing for this type of quarterback when he was doing Monday Night Football commentary. Yes.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So some of those people will still be there because they are Vikings fans that just happened to represent some pretty weird energy about Kirk Cousins. But yeah, there's definitely like Kirk Cousins fans, which that was like a thing several years ago. Like, hey, I'm a fan of Kirk Cousins. And you were like, excuse me? Like of Washington? Or no, I'm a fan of Kirk Cousins. Like, were you a Michigan State fan? No. Kirk Cousins.
A less fanatical version of the Tebow thing.
Right. And it was just like, okay, that's, you do you. That's kind of weird. And then Kirk Cousins would be like kind of mediocre, but with good statistics. And you just be like, okay, this guy's like, but I get what the argument is. And then the COVID thing happened. And now he's like a political home for a lot of football fans. And it's just like, okay, now we're just like dealing with all of this. And so when I say, hey man, it's Cousins' fault that he threw that interception, people are like, oh, you don't like him because of COVID. And it's like, what? No, he threw it right at the linebacker. What does that got to do with... Was the linebacker vaccinated? Like, what am I supposed to do about this?
Whether or not he took a shot in the arm has nothing to deal, or has nothing to do with the fact that he threw that pick. Like, come on.
Right. And it's like, hey, Arif, you dislike Kirk Cousins because of the COVID thing. And it's like, look, whether or not I personally dislike the guy, which the COVID thing like would play a role in, but it wouldn't define it. Like people who like or dislike people because of the COVID thing feel like are missing the forest for the trees, right? Like that's just like a thing, right? It's representative of a much larger set of concerns potentially, right? But it's not its own thing that is enough for me to like I still don't think Lamar Jackson's vaccinated, right? I don't think he's had medicine. That guy gets flu often.
Well, that was the line from the dude on Fox Sports 1. I was like, I don't even think he's had a flu shot before.
Right, yeah. Like, that guy gets sick all the time, right? I like Lamar Jackson. He's probably not vaccinated. I didn't know how I felt about Josh Allen back when we thought he wasn't vaccinated. Turns out he was. But, like, you're like, Josh Allen from Wyoming. I don't know, man. His vibes are kind of weird. But man, he's like a golden retriever when he plays. That kind of rules. I'm into this, right? Like it's like whatever. I don't know. But like the Cousins thing, like when he's not vaccinated, there's a whole host of like other cultural signifiers that are attached to it, right? Like I mentioned Don Cousins at the Discovery Church. The Discovery Church has some very clear viewpoints that are very polarizing, right? Kirk Cousins is friends with particular political figures that are very polarizing. I'm not talking about Donald Trump, right? It like there's a whole series of things here that are attached to Kirk Cousins that are reasons that people like him, reasons that people dislike him. And it's weird to just focus on the vaccine thing. Honestly, it was very present because it had very like real world impacts on the operation of a football team. And then also eventually on the field. Like, so it was very present. It's a very easy thing to talk about. But like there's a lot of other things. But like the thing is, I very often feel like I'm defending him just as often as I'm being a detractor of him, right? The opposite of defending is attacking. I should have just said attacking. Whatever.
Well,
words.
It's not like you're right for a living or anything.
Right. But exactly. How do words work? But it's like I've been saying all year that Kirk Cousins was playing outstanding this year. But like the people who are like Kirk Cousins stands don't like register that. They just know I dislike him because of the vaccine thing, right? That's the thing. But I'm like, hey man, he had like a great year, like a truly outstanding year. Like I don't like 4-4 is a disservice to his actual record this year. His statistics are a disservice to his record because of how many bounced interceptions he had. His ball placement was fantastic. His improvisation was great. This is one of the best years of Kirk I've ever seen. He only played 8 games. What a tragedy, right? This might be Kirk's best year ever, actually. I shouldn't have said might be. He was great. And then last year, I was like, hey, man, the comebacks are weird. But we got to talk about the fact that quarters 2 and 3 are a catastrophe zone for this guy. And honestly, a lot of quarter 1, right? Like as soon as we get past the opening drive, after that, what's going on? We got to talk. And I was like, 2023 is like not that good of a season. We just kind of remember these comebacks. Okay, well, yeah, great.
2022 was remarkable for that, yes.
Yeah, and so like, right, yeah, 2022. I did it again. But 2023 was fantastic. 2022, weird first, second, third quarter. Whoa, what a great fourth quarter. 2021, he was good. It was just like, I don't know. I feel like I'm calling balls and strikes fairly closely. Like, I feel like I'm doing a pretty decent job hitting the strike zone. But like, all of this other stuff, like, yeah, I do find him annoying. That's fine. Who cares? Like, I found Donovan McNabb kind of annoying. But he was bad, so it didn't matter. No one noticed. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, yeah, fine. The quarterback is kind of annoying. Stephon Diggs was kind of annoying for a lot of people for most of the time. That's fine. He's still a good player. I don't know, man. It's weird that all happened. A lot of those guys will be gone, but not all of them. And a lot of those guys that are now attached on because that like grew because like that hospital dropped him as a spokesman when he refused to get vaccinated, which fair. A bunch of people are like cause celeb, right? A bunch of people like attach themselves to Kirk, and that's just going to happen. And Atlanta's just going to have to deal with that. But Atlanta has had like a weird political culture for a long time, so maybe they'll have the tools. Maybe they'll figure it out. But that's going to be interesting.
Well, speaking of the Atlanta situation, NBA player Lou Williams famously had a wing flavor named after him at Magic City. What would be a good Cousins-inspired chicken wing?
So we're talking about this before the show, and I came up with an example of something that kind of has the vibe, but it's just absolutely not true. So at first we were like, well, just like a dry, bare chicken wing. But that's not enough because Kirk is like weird, right? And he's not like plain. He just appears plain. And I was like, well, what's weird? But you still don't know if it's like good or bad. And I remember I went to Blue Door Pub, which had like a rotating wing of the week, right? Into a different chicken wing. And one week they had like these fish sauce wings. And I was like, what? Because I like using fish sauce in cooking. But it's like a couple of drops to add like glutamic acid, right? It creates umami, right? That's the whole point. It's not a flavor. I was like, that's crazy. So I ordered it and it was weird. And I didn't feel disgusted, but I didn't crave more of it. And with wings, it's pretty easy to crave more of it. So it's like, That's like probably a negative, right? But like, what's going on? I kind of want to figure this out. But Kirk is obviously not a fish sauce wing. Obviously not.
No,
That's
no.
way too exotic. And then you came up with something that was perfect and fits entirely in line with what we were talking about.
There are people who go out specifically and like marinate their wings in ranch for X period of time. This is
right, and a lot of ranch is buttermilk, and a lot of people marinate wings in buttermilk. So
yes, so this is
ranch.
This is what he does. This is absolutely the Kirk Cousins wing. Makes sense to me.
Yep.
Beef Brewski asks, Arif, thank you for discussing exorcism on the latest episode. I'm currently tempted to purchase the Norse Code shower curtain. My local exorcist is wondering if you know which of the 72 demons empirically verified in the Lesser Keys of Solomon is most likely to be responsible for the attack.
Okay, so I did discuss exorcism in the last episode. You can verify. Like, did that happen?
I'm going to pull in a reef here and say I don't remember what we talked about.
What? I lean heavily on you for this. This is such a disappointment.
I'm not helping you out on this one.
When he says the attack, I'm like, what? What attack? Did we discuss an attack? Who needed to be exorcised? Okay, great, cool. I already knew I was flying in blind at this question. Now I'm flying mega blind. Okay, great. When he asked this, I was like, all right, I've had enough of like theologians and philosophers of religion. This is crazy. You know, in The Good Place, like the running joke for Chidi is like, but by the way, you should all watch The Good Place. One of the characters is a professor of moral philosophy. And the running joke is that no one likes professors of moral philosophy. I would like to expand that to also include religious philosophy. Beef, you ask too many questions, and I keep on making up stuff about theology, and like, like a little bit too much. And instead of doing like the cool thing and calling me out, which is way better, you just take me at face value and then ask a deeper question, and which is such a philosophy thing to do, by the way. Like the spirit of Socrates lives on, and it's just as annoying. I can't do this. I think I signed a book, and it was like a Norse mythology book.
Yes.
Something.
It was yeah.
I regret it. Can I unsign that now? Is that a thing we could do? Can we organize that?
We'd have to have another live show, and I feel like we can pull that off.
Spirit of Socrates lives on, and it's just as annoying.
Here is some breaking news.
Oh, no.
From Rap Sheet. A new quarterback in Minnesota. The Vikings are expected to sign Sam Darnold. 1 year, $10 million.
I could do $10 million. That's actually not bad. Okay, so cool. I already had like my take holstered, so we're good here.
Yeah.
Refer to the thing I said earlier. We've got an anti-woke quarterback again, even though he's got the coasts. Oh wait, did you mean like this play on the field? Yeah, he's fine.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about his play on the field. We're not discussing.
He looks like a caveman. We can't talk about that.
We can't talk about whether or not he would look like he'd be one of the guys in the. I'm trying to remember the name of the Wolverines. Yes, he's one of the '80s movies Wolverines. So we get our breaking news. Sam Darnold is going to be a Minnesota Viking. All because we took a while to get started recording tonight.
It's true. Okay, so from the perspective of like stable, unstable metrics that help predict play. Now, obviously 2023, very small sample size. So it's tough to use, but in using the 2023 sample, he blows everything out of the water. Great clean pocket grade, great standard dropback grade, great grade on first and second down, great grade under center without play action, and a great grade when throwing beyond the sticks, right? Like, he was great at all of those things. Fantastic. Starter level stuff. But like, no sample size. Okay, well, if we expand this to 2022, he is above NFL average in all of those things. Okay, for $10 million, that's a crazy good deal. Now, here's the problem. If we go back to 2021 and include his largest sample, but under Matt Rule, it's all 24th percentile, 25th percentile, like all of it, like down the line, like clean pocket, standard drop back, no play action, first and second down. Like it's all of it, right? Would you want a bridge quarterback that has that in his history? And if you include all of that, is that a more representative sample than the stuff we have the last 2 years? I don't know. But I think for the most part, you're in a spot where you've got a guy that performs in a system that I would not argue is super similar to the Vikings, even though it's got like the same DNA, but asks a lot of the same skills, right? The ability to roll out of play action and identify what you're doing, the ability to operate both shotgun and under center, the ability to kind of hang tough in the pocket for like a half second longer and just get the ball off for an explosive play. I think you do all of those things. I fundamentally, I just don't mind the signing. And I think that though he'll just make some stupid mistakes, we are over remembering what this guy like did as a Jet when he was out with mono, when he was seeing ghosts.
Sorry, now I'm reminded of him being in the mono image. Oh yeah,
isn't it great? Like I don't know, the Vikings the Vikings going like from meme quarterback to meme quarterback to meme quarterback is like nice. Like I like Teddy, but he wasn't a meme quarterback. But then you get Sam Bradford, 100% that. Case Keenum, who I think would have been that had he been around for longer. Kirk Cousins, obviously a meme quarterback. Joshua Dobbs, are you kidding me?
100%.
He's made of memes, right? Yeah. And then Nick Mullins, who was a dark horse to be a meme quarterback, 100% is, because it's just him and Jameis Winston in a lot of these statistics, right? It's like, who is the highest percentage of both positive and negatively graded plays? Him and Jameis Winston. Who has like this many yards, this many interceptions? Him and Jameis Winston. Like it's just nuts, right? That's a meme quarterback. So it's like you've got going from that to like another guy who just is a meme. Like his enduring image is just that video. That's pretty great.
Yeah.
Also, yeah, they're probably drafting a guy.
Yeah, that kind of screams we're going to the draft.
Yeah, so. Which good for them. They didn't like trade for, I don't know, Geno Smith. I don't know who'd be available for trade.
10 million means there's more room for JJ money. There is that.
Yeah, God, 10 million is cheap. So you got Kirk on 28 dead, and then Sam Darnold at 10 million. 38 million in quarterback is not a lot in a 260. I think the Vikings adjusted cap is 261. I think the league's adjusted cap is 255 because the Vikings have like rollover and stuff like that. And like LTB incentives turning into unlikely incentives, whatever. 261 million, 38 devoted to quarterback. That's so little. Now, obviously, I just made an argument that like the whole deal is not to maximize return on investment. And on the football machine earlier today, I made a whole big deal about how we cannot overfocus on efficiency because there is a cap on the number of players on the field at a time, right? 11. And so if you have the 11 most efficient players on the field, you are probably losing every game because you need to end up paying for players in an inefficient way to maximize the total value you have on the field. And so it's not like we shouldn't celebrate that, like, hey, the Vikings quarterback room is 14.6% of the cap. But I do think it creates some opportunities for the Vikings to be aggressive and maybe, keep Danielle Hunter, right? Because if you have Hunter, Van Ginkel, and Grenard, like that rules. That rules so hard, right? And then you get a quarterback in the first round and a cornerback in the second round. And now, I don't know, you're kind of cooking with gas, right? Like you've got a great receiving core. You've got a pretty good offensive line. Still have to figure out guard, whether or not it's Dalton Risner or someone else. The running back, you can probably figure out in the fourth round, plus a free agent, plus Ty Chandler, right? I don't know, man. Like this is a team that would be fun. It's not like it's going to be a team that like wins 9-10 games right away. But I think like the thing about like the Sam Darnold signing is first, you're not going to be committed to him. It's just you get to play your quarterback whenever they're ready. But like second, there's just a lot of opportunity to add some really cool players on the team, and that's fun. So Sam Darnold to me is not like people are treating this like, hey man, they just called up Christian Ponder and brought him in. It's not like that.
No,
he like played pretty well. So he could be the bulk of his career and not play well at all. But like, I just think there's like, something here where it's like, yeah, maybe he's not going to be great. But if he's what the Vikings envisioned when they signed Matt Castle, that's fine. Now, obviously, that didn't matter because he just got injured right away. But the whole point was like, we don't know if Teddy's ready yet. Matt Castle's gonna like steer the ship for a little bit. I think that's fine. I don't know. I like the signing. He's tough in the pocket, just like Cousins was. He's willing to wait a little bit for a window to open up to throw the ball, and he seems to be reading the field a lot better in these last 2 years than he was 3 years ago. So I don't know. It's not like Zach Wilson.
Well, we actually have some breaking news and like live reaction. That was kind of cool. And at the very end of the mailbag, the only stuff
just in time, just under the gun. That's crazy.
Barely. Let's go to Don from Ohio, who asks, will Cole's cash be the next crypto in the Atlanta contract? Like, will that be how Cousins?
Oh, like how Russell Okung was paid in Bitcoin?
Yes.
Not really. Yes. It just feels like Kohl's is not a company that understands cryptocurrency. So like that's my hesitation. But like, yeah, as an alternative currency, it's still a fiat coin, right? Well, I guess it's not. I guess they define fiat by governmental fiat, and I define fiat as any currency that doesn't have instrumental value. So you have to believe in it for it to have value. And I feel like cryptocurrency is that. Just like dollars are that, but without governmental backing. And Cole's cash wouldn't have governmental backing unless something like seriously wrong happens in the next couple of years. Wrong and extremely unexpected.
Which I mean, all things are possible. Let's be honest.
Right? Yeah, of course. Right. Coles could win the election, and you're like, oh, geez, okay, better stock up with that Coles cash. But yeah, but it's like to me a kind of a fiat currency. But I guess. It's not like, by the way, instrumental currency is like a cigarette in prison, right? Like you trade cigarettes as currency, but also the cigarette has use value as a cigarette. And gold was kind of like a little bit of both. Cole's cash is not instrumental, except insofar as Cole's honors it, which I think makes it more of a fiat. I don't know. That one's tough. I'm going to say yes-ish.
Also from Don from Ohio, if you could sign any Twitter/podcast fan from another team to Norse Code, who would they be? Conversely, who would you cut from Norse Code and why?
Well, there's been a cap casualty candidate on the Norse Code staff for a long time. It's Dusty, obviously.
Yeah, that's going to end up having to happen.
Yeah, so Dusty's gone in a situation where we've got the opportunity to make an acquisition, and honestly, other situations, but it's not there. And then we bring in Nate Tice from the Athletic Football Show, which is technically not of another team, but he coached for the Atlanta Legends in the AAF, so I'm counting that.
That's not bad. I was thinking that you were going to be grabbing your former. Well, you have as you said, you have an adversarial relationship with all of your friends.
Before the show, I was like trying to figure out who's like, no, that ruins that bit. That ruins that bit. That ruins that bit.
There was a Seahawks writer that we used to get on all the time until he went to the Athletic. So I can't remember his name, but I was.
You mean the Ringer, Danny Kelly?
Yes, it was Danny Kelly.
I like Danny. We hung out at the Combine and at the Senior Bowl, but also I do bully him a lot, but only in person, not really online. So it wouldn't ruin the bit, actually, to have him on.
Well, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. You got everything. You got the Cousins signing, the Cousins leaving. You got a couple of signings. You got breaking news. You got a mailbag. All of that, all in one episode. Fantastic. I'm also stoked we don't have to put in another emergency episode. So, Arif, what do you have to plug?
So over at Substack, I've got my piece, Cousins Once Removed. I'm never going to have a title that good.
Just accept it. This is the high water mark.
Yeah, this is like winning state in high school. It's like, oh, this is my whole life now. It's all downhill from here. But yeah, so there's that. I've also got a piece I've been working on since like late December, like a piece of investigative journalism I'm really excited about. And if all goes according to plan, which it probably won't, because like I just got a bunch of texts today, like an hour before we recorded. I was like, hey, did you add this? Did you add this? Did you add this? And I was like, no, Jesus, now I have to verify all this. So I hope to get that out next week. It's going to be huge. I'm really proud of it. I've talked to 15, 20 people to get the story right. And so that's going to be coming up soon over at the Wide Left Substack. I'm sure I've written other things recently there too. Check it out.
I imagine a Sam Darnold piece is probably forthcoming as well.
At some point in the near future. I don't know. Maybe I could get Luke to write it. That'd be funny. I'm going to text him.
I'm just remembering a piece that he had written, and your editorial remark was, "Oh God, not this again."
Yeah.
So that is it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. For Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember that maybe you should just put that in a garage next time. And we'll be back soon. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of... and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I'm your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or at my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merch. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
Hey, all things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.